Welcome back, everyone, to our series, Why Christians Should Keep the Law. And in our last episode, we actually saw James the Just bring 4 specific commandments to the table, commandments that were to be implemented immediately upon those Gentiles specifically who are turning to the Lord Jesus in faith. You're not to waste any time. These things have to be placed upon them before anything else. They must do these. And the first one we saw was porneia. It was sexual immorality, fornication. That is immediately to be placed upon the Gentiles. So if they at that time had been engaging in fornication, it's immediately to stop, to cease, no longer engaging in that behavior. Well, today we're going to begin to look at the other side of the tracks, the food laws. There are 3 specific laws. We'll take the first one today, those things that have been polluted by idols. And to kick it off, I want to take you back to the Torah, back to the law. And I want to take you to Exodus 34, verse 15. This is what we read. Lest you make a covenant with the inhabitants of the land, and they play the harlot with their gods and make sacrifice to their gods, and one of them invites you, and you eat of his sacrifice. And so a warning is going out. You cannot participate in this activity. As the children of God, as Israel, you must abstain from eating food sacrificed to idols. Now, jumping into the New Testament, the Apostle Paul gives a beautiful and comprehensive explanation of this. And you got to appreciate when Paul writes to the Corinthians, you got to appreciate Corinth is an epicenter of total paganism. I mean, it is steeped in immorality. It is steeped in idol worship. And so him giving this commandment in the way that he does and expressing it as comprehensively as he does is extremely relevant. Listen to his words in chapter 10, verse 18. He says, observe Israel after the flesh. Are not those who eat of the sacrifices partakers of the altar? And so if you understand this sacrificial system, there would be times where, for example, an offerer, someone from Israel, just a typical Israeli, would come and he would bring a peace offering. And God would get his appointed portion, and the priest would get his appointed portion, and the offerer himself, who brought the sacrifice, would also eat of it. And so you have from the priesthood to the offerer, they are partakers of the altar. And the significance of that is you are partaking in something where you are adoring and worshiping the Lord. The altar very much so is a place of worship. And so it's very sacred. And when you eat of that, you're partaking of that, where you are honoring and acknowledging the Lord. And so very significant. Then he goes on and he says this in verse 19. What am I saying then? That an idol is anything, or what is offered to idols is anything? Rather, the things that the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. Paul's actually drawing from Leviticus 17 here. He goes on and says, and I do not want you to have fellowship with demons. You cannot drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You cannot partake of the Lord's table and the table of demons. This is why we as Christians cannot eat of food that has been sacrificed to an idol, because you can't be a partaker of Jesus Christ and at the same time be an eater of food, consume food that has been offered to a demon. And that whole act of worship and adoration, it's been dedicated to a demon. Paul says you can't do both. That whole act is an abomination to God. Now, Paul goes on and he says this in verse 25, eat whatever is sold in the meat market, asking no questions for conscience sake, for the earth is Lord's and all its fullness. And so Paul is given a criteria here, a methodology by which we are called to approach the public meat market. And that is, don't ask. If there's, you got hamburgers laying out there, Okay, that looks good. Don't ask whether or not it's been offered to an idol. In fact, he takes the idea even further. He says, if any of those who do not believe invites you to dinner and you desire to go, eat whatever is set before you, asking no questions for conscience sake. And so even if someone who is an unbeliever invites you over and like to get to know you better, you don't ask. When he brings out the plate of food to show hospitality and show kindness, you don't ask whether it's been offered to an idol. However, Paul goes on to say this in verse 28, but if anyone says to you, this was offered to idols, do not eat it for the sake of the one who told you and for conscience sake, for the earth is the Lord's and all its fullness. Everything changes once you come to the knowledge that that food had been offered to an idol. You do not want to partake of the Lord's table and the table of demons. And for the conscience even of the one who told you, if you go over to somebody's house, they lay that food down and say, here, I really like you. Here's this food. I want to show you hospitality. This was offered to idols, but I want you to eat it now. For his sake and for your own, you are to declare, I will not eat that. I will not eat this. And this is why. It is an abomination to the Lord. That food has been dedicated to a demon. Now, let's jump to Revelation and look at the teachings of Jesus. Listen to what he says. He says, but I have a few things against you, because you have there those who hold the doctrine of Balaam, who taught Balak to put a stumbling block before the children of Israel to eat things sacrificed to idols and to commit sexual immorality. These two things, God hates them. And if you've ever read the story of Balaam and Balak, fascinating how Balak tried to get this prophet Balaam over and over and over again to curse Israel. And Balaam's response was, how can I curse that which God has blessed? He didn't have the power to remove the blessing from Israel. But here's where the story gets interesting. Balaam, the only way to do this was to instruct Balak to teach the women, the Moabite women, to seduce Israel so that they willingly come out and partake and start eating of the sacrifices of the altar to Baal of Peor and committing this immorality. Do you know that the blessing of God was removed and the curse followed? The very thing that Balak wanted to do, that he had no ability to do, Balaam had no power to do it. It ended up happening because Israel got seduced and willingly went and did something that is an abomination to God. Now, I make this point because you better believe if you're a born-again Christian, the devil is coming and he is going to attempt to try to seduce you to eat food sacrificed to idols and to commit sexual immorality. Well, stay tuned. We'll be looking at the other two in the following episodes. So the Lord bless you and keep you.